had some questions that they had prepared for me. Kelly, go. Oh, there you are. And so I'm actually going to answer the questions that you have now before I answer these questions first. So from our confirmands, are there other questions that you have, or from your parents or your families, that I can answer before I try to go through the questions that you came up with? And a whopping 14 questions. So any questions from, as they say, from the floor? No? Okay, well, I'll let you hold on to those. Feel free to interrupt me at any point and let me know the questions that you might have. I tend to wander, so I'm going to... How far can I wander with this, Kelly? How far can I wander away with this thing?
As far as the cord goes.
Let's talk about 5 feet. Let's see how... See, this is one way to make sure the bishop doesn't get too far lost.
If the speaker falls over.
That's probably a good sign. Well, the first question on my list is, how did you become bishop? Well, back in November, 10 years ago before COVID in regular time, the delegates, so each congregation in our diocese gets to have some delegates and all the clergy get to vote. And so I was one of 3 candidates that were up for election to be Bishop of Missouri. And the delegates and the clergy got together, and according to the way that our constitution and canons work, and there are a fancy word of saying the church's laws, the way that they work is that to become bishop, you have to be elected with a majority in both the laity, so all the lay folks from the congregations, and a majority in the clergy as well, and they have to vote to have that majority at the same time. And so what ended up happening is that the clergy and the lay people voted together at the same time on the first ballot, which is pretty unusual in the Episcopal Church, because most bishops are elected around the 3rd ballot or so, because usually it takes a little while to kind of figure out who you really, who's really the person that you want to be there. And I can tell you from my family, when we got the news, we were completely shocked, because we weren't, I wasn't expecting to get the phone call to say, oh, by the way, we did this, and we did it like pretty quickly. But as they say, the rest of it is history. I was supposed to be made the bishop back on April 25th, and because of the pandemic, it got pushed back to June 13th. And normally we would have had, the big celebration across the diocese and all that stuff. But because of the pandemic, we had a very small, I think there were 25 people in the cathedral, and live streaming in the whole 9 yards. So that's pretty much how I ended up becoming the Bishop of Missouri. The second question, when did you realize you wanted to be a bishop? Ooh. I see we do easy questions here at St. Peter's. Well, I don't think you ever get up one morning and go, I think I'm going to be a bishop this morning. For me, it took family members and friends and clergy to say, hey, by the way, we see these qualities in you that we think you should let your name go forward in an election. And it wasn't my first, it wasn't the first thing that came to my mind that it's like, oh, I'll run for bishop or something. It took a bit of convincing. And for me, I have a rule that for me to do something, I need to hear 3 different people say the same thing 3 different times independent of each other. So I had 3 different colleagues one of which was 2 of which were in the Diocese of Missouri, and a couple who were outside, who called me up when the diocesan profile came out and said, you really should think about running for Bishop of Missouri. To which I went, I don't think so. Then the second friend called up and said, did you see the profile of the Diocese of Missouri? You should really think about running for Bishop of the Diocese of Missouri. I went like, I'll think about it, but I don't think so. Then the third person called me up independently and said, you need to run for the Bishop of Missouri. And so I said, well, there's the third one, and I submitted all the paperwork and went through the psychological testing, because they have to make sure that you're crazy enough to want to do this. And the rest of it is history. We went through these wonderful things called walkabouts. A good friend of mine referred to them as a dog and pony show. So it's kind of when you get to come to the diocese and they ask all kinds of questions and they get to meet you and your family and stuff like that. And so those were lots of fun for me. And I really do mean they were actually lots of fun. Then the election, and we just talked a little bit about the election, so that the walkabouts and kind of being on the ballot and all that stuff preceded all of that. So it wasn't my first inclination to put my name forward, but because enough friends and colleagues said, you know, you really should think about doing this, I was able to hear God's Holy Spirit speaking through them. What do you like about being able to see different churches in Missouri? Well, one of the wonderful things that I get to do is I get to go visit all of the congregations in the Diocese of Missouri. And one of the promises that I made when I first came was that I was going to see every single congregation at least once in the first year that I was here. I am happy to report that I have seen every single congregation at least once, and we're now on our second round of congregations. One of the blessings that the pandemic gave was that I could be virtually just about anywhere. And so, you know, Canon Doris, who is recovering from surgery, so please keep her in your prayers. Canon Doris and I had planned on this grand road trip across the diocese. We were calling it Doris and Deon's Excellent Adventure Across the Diocese of Missouri. And you know, that didn't happen, and so we switched to doing town halls, and I think I did at least 2 town halls here with the folks at St. Peter's, but we did those across the entire diocese, and then I started actually driving to go see parts of the diocese as things begin to be a little bit better. And so I have been to every single congregation in our diocese at least once, and in some cases 2 or 3 times. So I think I've been here at St. Peter's, I think I've been with you at least 4 times in the last year that I've been here. So confirmation, and there was Susie Skinner's celebration a couple weeks ago, confirmation today, and I think I was here for another event as well. So I've been kind of making my rounds. So one of the things is, like, you know, I don't like people at all. So one of the terrible parts of my job is I have to go around the diocese and spend time with people. So I will say that that's perhaps one of the best parts of my job. I get to interact and talk and be around good Episcopalians who are actually excited about being Episcopalians. So I really do enjoy just being out and having conversations. So that's that one. How much time do you dedicate to church each day? 23 hours out of my day, generally. I often refer to my calendar as managed chaos, because I literally go, and on some days, I am literally back-to-back with Zoom meetings, with meeting people, or now it's back-to-back Zoom meetings and then going out and driving to go see people for meetings and whatnot. So my calendar is decently busy, but I do make sure that, so Friday is my general day off, and so on Friday I make sure that I go nowhere near my computer, I go nowhere near my office, and so Friday is the one day that I kind of pull back from everything and take some much needed rest. If there's nothing happening on a Saturday, it means that I get a Saturday as well that I can just be and hang out with my family and all that stuff. But my schedule when it comes to doing things is pretty crazy. And I think Zoom has made it even crazier. I mean, there have been a couple times that I sat in front of my computer, turned the computer on, and Zoom wouldn't start. And I think Zoom was Deon'd out because I'd been spending so much time on Zoom. Zoom was like, nope, I'm done with you for the day. I think my busiest day I had, I think 8 back-to-back Zoom meetings. So like Zoom, 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 break, Zoom, 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 Zoom. So I think I should have invested in Zoom technology when I was first elected. I would be super rich and we could do all kinds of stuff around the diocese. But hindsight. So yeah, my calendar is pretty crazy, and I do dedicate quite a lot of time to being with the congregations and being in conversations with people across the diocese. For instance, like Shug is one of our transitional deacons in the diocese, and so we have approximately 30 people who are going through the ordination process at the moment. So that's a lot of people that I have to meet with and have conversations with about their spiritual journey. And The bane of my existence is email. I get so much email, and most of it I have to respond. I keep trying to think that I need to hire a ghostwriter to just, respond to email for me, but I somehow manage to keep it going, and with all the Zoom and everything else. So being the bishop is decently busy, I will say that much. What is your favorite church you have ever been to? St. Peter's. Being a bishop also means you get to be very diplomatic. What's your favorite part about being a bishop? I would say the people. One of the things I absolutely love is hearing folks' stories. Hearing the stories of when you have been felt welcomed or loved, or hearing the stories that people will share about coming to the Episcopal Church and how welcoming it was, or whatever it is, just hearing people's stories. One of my passions is I have a degree in history, and so I love to hear stories. I'm an NPR junkie, so I think my son can probably recite the number for NPR's campaign phone number. Or at least one point you could, right?
Probably.
But I have a thing for stories, so it's just hearing people's stories and hearing how the Episcopal Church is kind of transforming their lives. Let's see, what is a Lambeth conference? So the Lambeth conference is a gathering of all the bishops across the entire Anglican Communion. So we are, as the Episcopal Church, we are part of a 38-member group called the Anglican Communion. So in the United States, there are roughly, I think, about 1.9, 1.8-ish Episcopalians running around. Across the Anglican Communion, there are a couple million of us. So the Anglican Communion is the second largest denomination in the world. So the Roman Catholics are number one, and the Anglicans are number two. So there's a lot of us. And so every 10 years or so, the Archbishop of Canterbury that you'll hear prayed for, Justin, the Archbishop of Canterbury, he will gather all the bishops from across the Anglican Communion. And we were supposed to gather last year, but again, because of the pandemic, it has been delayed, so we're gathering next year. And so it's an opportunity for all the bishops across all of the Anglican Communion, so all the churches that you can think of, all the bishops gather for a time of prayer, for reflection, to just be together, to have conversations, and to get to know each other's context. Currently in the Anglican Communion, there are approximately 114 languages spoken. So think about that. Across the entire Anglican Communion. So when all these bishops get together, it is a big deal because you're having conversation with someone who probably doesn't speak a language that you understand. I mean, I'm decent with Spanish and with French, but that's 2 of 114 languages. So when we get together, it's a really big deal. So I'm actually looking forward to being at Lambeth next year and meeting some of the bishops from across the rest of the Anglican Communion. Do you think this is how your life would be when you were my age, 13? No. I was confirmed when I was 11, and when the bishop came for my confirmation, he just scared the heck out of me because it was this imposing guy with the pointy hat who came and put hands on my head and said some words and was like, okay, you're going to go forward now and be a good Episcopalian. I just thought, what? So no, when I was 13, I could not have imagined being a bishop. But God, I am always convinced, has a really good sense of humor. So here I am. The irony of me being a bishop is that right now, I am the youngest bishop that we have in the Episcopal Church. One of my classmates, her name was Jennifer Reddle, she had the title of youngest bishop for a little bit, and she ceremoniously sent me the crown of being the youngest bishop in the mail a couple months ago to say, well, good luck to you with that, have fun. So it's not something I would have imagined, but it's something that, having done it now for a year, it's something I couldn't imagine not doing. So it's actually lots and lots of fun. There are days, but for the most part, most of it is lots of fun. Why did you move to St. Louis? Well, you kind of called me to be bishop, and I couldn't do that for commuting from Michigan. So that would be a really long 8.5-hour commute to come from Michigan here back and forth. My family and I, we moved to St. Louis February 21st, 2020. And so we had maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so before everything shut down. I said I've moved a lot in my life. And this is the fastest I've ever unpacked and settled into a house. Because with nothing else to do but being in the house, it's kind of like, we went through boxes and we were unpacked in like a week. It was just kind of like, oh, well, here we go. But it's been lots of fun actually moving to St. Louis and getting to know the area and that wonderful thing called gooey butter cake. What did you study in school? What kind of school did you attend to acquire a job like this? Well, I went for college, I went to Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. Highly recommend it if anybody's looking for college. I actually was pre-med. So I did not study theology or anything like that in college. I have a history and English degree. Well, I have a history and English bachelor's and an associate's in biology and theology and religion. So I also have a biology degree that's running around out there. You can see I get to use that biology degree a whole lot. So my degrees really have nothing to do with what I actually, with being the bishop. I went to General Theological Seminary in New York, and so that's where I did my formation to be a priest. And the rest of it is, knowledge that you learn on the job. There are just some things that they just can't teach you. And I think that's with any vocation. You have a title that says what you're supposed to do, and then there's a real world of what you actually do. And a lot of the times, the two of them don't look anything alike. I know of bishops who were firefighters, who were engineers. So the degree that you have doesn't necessarily mean that that's where you're going to go in. That's where you're going to end up. So I do highly recommend the diaconate or the priesthood. If anybody who's thinking about it, talk to me. I'm happy to talk to you about what it feels like, and to kind of go through that process. Or you can talk to Deacon Shook. She's kind of in the midst of the process.
I think it would be better to talk to me.
Yeah. Betty, come talk to me. What was your motivation to become bishop? Probably, as I said earlier, friends, colleagues, my community. I'm a big community discernment person. So my community saying that these are the gifts that we see in you was perhaps my motivation. What is your favorite reading in the Bible? Oh gosh, there's so many. So one of the things I recommend, especially for confirmands, a quick project to do, pick up the Bible and pick a book and just read it. On Sunday mornings we get these little things called pericopes. It's part of the lectionary. Pericope is a fancy word of saying a portion from the Bible. But one of the things that you could do is literally pick a book of the Bible and just read it from the beginning to the end. Because one of the things about the Bible is we think of the Bible as, it's just one book. But it really is not. The Bible is 66 different books split up into 2 sections. So, there's 66-ish different authors of these different books. And so each book is independent, but we put them together in one book. So if you think of it like a filing cabinet, and each file is a different book of the Bible. And so they talk about all kinds of stuff. The Bible is, if you've ever read anything by Danielle Steele, the Bible has nothing on Danielle Steele in those books. There's all kinds of great stories that happen in the Bible that we don't necessarily hear in church, but they're just fabulous stories. There's a great one about one of Jesus' ancestors. Her name was Rahab, who lived in the red light district of the city that she was in, Jericho. And there's another wonderful story of someone being impaled with a tent peg. So there's murder, there's intrigue, there's betrayal. It's all in the Bible. And so if you pick a book, you will get a fuller understanding. But one of my absolute favorites we're getting a little piece of it this morning, is the book of Job. Because Job, I just love Job. He is very real. He's very human. He complains to God. He kind of goes and says to God, "Look, you're kind of messing up here, God. This life that you give me is just not quite working." And Job's friends, who really are not friends, comes and tells him, oh, by the way, Job, you don't need to worry don't worry with God. God's not that important. And Job says to them, as much as I'm mad at God right now, I'm going to stick with God. And he continues to complain, and he complains some more. And finally, God comes to Job and says to him, who do you think you are? I built this whole cosmos, and you're going to have the nerve to come and tell me what I'm supposed to do? But it's this wonderful interchange between God and Job. And Job ends up with what I would call a come to Jesus moment, where God kind of calls Job on the carpet and tells him exactly what he's supposed to do and how life goes. But it's a wonderful book, and it has all kinds of ups and downs and intrigues. But at its core, it talks about how God is with us in the midst of everything that might be going on in our lives. But there's some really great books of the Bible that as I said, pick a book, read it from the beginning to the end, and you'll get a fuller picture of what's actually going on. Why are rosaries not as common in the Episcopal Church as they are in the Roman Catholic Church? So I have to distinguish between a rosary and what we call Anglican prayer beads. A rosary has a set of prayers that go with each bead. So it's usually, the small beads are Hail Mary. So Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, blessed the Lord, blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus, is the small beads. And then the big beads tend to be the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, the whole 9 yards. In the Episcopal Church, we have what we call Anglican prayer beads. They look exactly like rosaries. But what we do with our prayer beads is that we don't prescribe what each bead is supposed to be for. So you can take an Anglican prayer bead, or you can pick up a set of rosaries, and you can use it exactly the same way. It's intended to be a sensory way of doing prayers. So like I wear this little thing on my wrist, and it's always on my wrist here, because it's a fumble, it's a fidget somewhat, but it's also a way of keeping track for me of prayers during the day. So sometimes if I'm sitting on a Zoom call, most of the days when I'm sitting on a Zoom call, and the speaker, if I'm in a conference or something, and the speaker's not terribly engaging, I find myself just leading to prayer. And so this, for me, has become a really good prayer aid, because there are little beads that I can use my fingers to count the little prayer that I might be saying. And then there's a piece of metal, and if you see this up close, the metal is beginning to wear off, because that's the one that I use for a longer prayer. So it becomes part of my prayer, part of my daily prayer. Prayer beads are intended to be the exact same thing. It's a way for you to just have something that's incarnational to use, that's physical, to do prayers with. And what prayers you do really don't matter. The thing is, we tend to think of prayer as it has to be this formal thing where you go into church or something like that, and you put on the big church voice and, oh God, we love you so much. That's great. I do a lot of that. But prayer is something as simple as saying help. Anne Lamott, who's one of the greatest, for me, a really good theologian, she says that prayer comes in 3 forms. There's help, you know what that is. There's thank you, where we thank God for something that's going on. And then the other one is awe. And awe is when we don't have words. Awe is when you go to the Grand Canyon and you see the Grand Canyon for the first time, and there's nothing that you can say. Awe is holding a newborn baby for the very first time, or holding your grandchild for the first time. Awe are those moments in our lives where there's just not words. And so prayer at its core is just having a relationship with God. It's just talking to God about what's going on. It's at the end of the day just saying, you know what, God, today was a good day. I'm going to bed. Or when you get up in the morning, it's kind of, you know what, God, today is going to be a good day because I'm awake. Something as simple as that is prayer. Thomas Merton, who's another really good theologian, said, the way that I pray is breathe. So think about what he means by that. Just by being, you are praying. So if we see rosaries are great, and some of those prayer aids are wonderful, but if we see our whole life as being steeped in prayer, it gives us a completely different perspective on what we're doing. So I think that's all 14 questions. So other questions that other folks might have.
I have one.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure there were a lot of surprises when you stepped into the role, right? So what's one that kind of comes to mind? You're like, wow, I didn't realize this was going to be part of the job, or this was an experience.
Well, I can tell you, so the question is, what things that I didn't expect to be part of the job of being bishop. I never understood, so when I was a parish priest, so I was a parish priest for 14 years, whenever the bishop came to visit, the bishop would show up, in a small SUV and bring out all this stuff, and I always thought, like, why does the bishop have to carry, what's with all this stuff? So the biggest learning for me was that my car is now a traveling office. So when I go on a visitation, I literally have to bring everything that needs to be done for that day has to go with me. So that's been the strangest piece, that it's kind of, I have a mental checklist that it's like, okay, you have to carry your hat, you have to carry the stick. If you're going, make sure you wear your cross, put on your ring. There's like a whole list of things that the bishop has to carry with him. And so that's been the strangest piece. That, like I said to Kelly this morning, I had to almost turn around and go back home because I almost forgot the confirmation certificate sitting on my desk. So the amount of stuff that a bishop has to carry has been pretty strange. But aside from that, the other thing that's been different is having to sit in the bishop's chair. So each church has a bishop's chair, and I will tell you, the bishop's chair in every church is probably the most uncomfortable chair that they can find. I've had a few bishop's chairs that are just kind of like, who was this thing made for? But so little things like that. But for the most part, it's just been fun. So thank you, great question. Over there.
Is there a tenure, or just bishop?
You are stuck with me until I decide that, it's time for me to be done. Bishops are bishops for life, but they serve a diocese until, you can, as a bishop, stay until you're 72. 72 is mandatory retirement. So you're kind of stuck with me for a little bit because of how long I've been ordained, I can't retire until I'm at least 57. So I'm in my 40s now, so you have me for a while. So thank you, great question. Other questions? I know it's getting a little bit hot out here, so I don't want to keep you too long in the sun.
Can you talk about the icons on your vestment?
Oh, yes. So for those who were at the 8 o'clock service, you saw my vestments, the big thing that I wear over, it's called the chasuble. When I was elected bishop, one of the things that a bishop does is you get to pick what your vestments look like. And for me, community has always been important, and the people who have shaped my ministry and shaped my faith have been important. And so I have a friend of mine is a vestment maker, and so he made my vestments with icons on them. And so the icons are people who are important in my life or important to my faith formation. So what you'll see when I do that, you'll see a bunch of icons going down the side. And I'm going to try to remember all the people, because usually I have them around me that I can point and show who they are. There's Mary, the Mother of God. There's Mary Magdalene, because she was a witness to the resurrection, and she bore the good news. There's St. Paul on mine, because the parish that I came from before I became bishop was St. Paul. There's St. Mary Magdalene. Again, as I said, she was the bearer of the good news of Jesus' resurrection. There's Frankie Muse Jackson. She is a local St. Louisan who she was pretty big in the social justice or the civil rights movement in the 60s here in St. Louis around housing desegregation and all that stuff. Langston Hughes, who was a poet and author during the Harlem Renaissance, but he was also born here in St. Louis, so I wanted to make sure I had a St. Louis connection. There's Walter Dennis. He was the bishop, the suffragan bishop of New York, and one of my mentors when I was in seminary in New York. There's Barbara Harris. She was the first woman elected bishop in the Anglican Communion, And she was also my assigned mentor when I began the process of ordination. So I knew Bishop Harris when I was this, well, when she was this tall, and I was this tall. So I think that's it. I think that's all of them. So yeah, so but all of those folks, oh, I forgot one. Errol Barrow, he was the first Prime Minister of Barbados, where I was born and raised. So all of the icons have some kind of meaning or some connection to me and to the journey. And so what you won't see is the inside of my vestments, and there's a quote that's embroidered on the inside that says, "For we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses." It's a quote from St. Paul, and it's a reminder that we carry all the people who brought us to this day with us. And so that's embroidered on the inside to remind me that I don't do this by myself. So thank you, Shug. Great question. Any final questions? Because I don't want you all to melt out here in the sun.
I already am.
Well.
Melting.
I'm melting. Kelly?
Did you immigrate with your family, or were you an adult when you came to the United States?
So my brother and I moved my brother and I moved when I was 14 from Barbados, and it was just the two of us that moved. And then 2 years later, my mother moved. So my brother and his family's here. I have an aunt. My uncle died last year, so he was also here. So I have some family here, but my mother is one of 8 children. So I have a lot of aunts and uncles. And my father is one of 11 children. So I have a huge extended family, and they're everywhere. So we were supposed to go to Barbados this summer for our family reunion, but I don't think that's going to happen because of the pandemic. But when my family gets together, it's just chaos, because you bring either side of the family together, and the kids had kids, and the kids had kids, and the kids had kids. So there's usually about 150 of us when we get together, and that's just to the cousins. The second and distant cousins thing is just kind of like, if we added them, we'd be about 400 or 500. So, but yeah, when I moved, it was just my brother and I, and then the rest of my mother came right after. So thank you. Any final questions?
Is there a genealogist or a record keeper?
That would be me. Yep. I am because my family knew that I have a history degree, so they were like, "Oh, well, you're the historian."
Oh my gosh.
So I am the one who keeps track of who has a baby and who gets married and all that stuff. So I'm the keeper of all of the family stuff. So. Well, thank you all so very much for taking the time to be a part of the conversation and for enduring the sun and the heat to be out here to listen to me. I very, very much appreciate it. And to our confirmands, I look forward to seeing you all in the church. There'll be some hands laid and there'll be some prayers said.
Thank you.
Thanks.